Hi everyone, for today's lesson we're going to talk about two major literary terms, characterization and conflict. Within these two terms there's a lot of more specific terminology that we'll go over. Some of it is probably pretty straightforward, stuff that we already know. We're just kind of matching the term to the concepts that we might already be familiar with. So we'll be going over direct characterization, indirect characterization, static characters, dynamic characters, flat, round characters, foils, and antiheroes. And then for conflict, we'll be talking about external conflict and internal conflict. So for part one, we're going to start off with characterization. Characterization is the process by which the writer reveals the personality of a character. So there's two ways we can do this. The first way is through direct characterization, which is where the author directly tells us what the character is like. They're very straightforward. We don't need to fill in the gaps at all. It's right there for us. So for example, if the author says he is an athletic person, that would be direct characterization because right away we know exactly what this character is like. Indirect characterization is where the author still reveals what the character is like, but it's less direct. They're more telling us about the character's appearance, their actions, their words, their thoughts, or their feelings, or their effect on others, and then based on those attributes, we need to reveal or come up with our own conclusion about this character's personality. So an example of that would be saying he went to the gym every week in order to train for the Olympics. So here we have a sentence describing these characters' actions, but it takes us back to the same conclusion as in our first example, that this is an athletic person. It's just less direct in terms of how the author tells us. With this, we can decide that there are a few types of characters. Each of these types are based on change and personality. So for example, a static character is one who doesn't change much throughout the story. So they'll stay the same, they won't really have any major developments in attitude or beliefs or anything. The opposite would be a dynamic character who changes in an important way throughout the story. So usually characters that are more central to a story will be dynamic, and characters that are more peripheral or not as important will be static. We can also classify different types of characters based on personality. If they are a flat character, they only have one or two personality traits. We don't know too much about them. But if they are a round character, there's usually more than two personality traits revealed in the book. There's more dimensions to their personality. They are a little bit more complex. So typically, our main character will be a round character, and then the less important characters will usually be flat characters. Within this talk of characterization, there's two more important terms that we need to know. Those are foils and antiheroes. A foil, when we're talking in terms of literary discussion, a foil is a character who acts as a contrast to another character. So this is meant to highlight the other character's personality by contrasting the two. So this is usually somebody who's a sidekick, or the hero and the villain would be foils of each other. So those are two ways that you have different characters highlighting the other character's personality by showing the differences. So for example, Draco Malfoy is a foil to Harry Potter. For those of us who are familiar with either the books or the movies, we know that Draco Malfoy is pretty much everything Harry Potter is not, and each time he acts a certain way, it highlights Harry Potter's contrasting qualities. Also, Gaston is a foil to the Beast in Beauty and the Beast. These are just two examples, and even if you're not super familiar with either of these particular works, that's okay. I'll bet in any movie or book that you can think of, especially ones from childhood that are more this strict black or white personality types, you'd probably be able to think of somebody who acts as a foil, and we'll continue to discuss this in class. The last one for characters is an antihero. This one is a protagonist, so it is someone who is the main character, but it's somebody who lacks the qualities that we usually associate with heroes. So it's somebody who is still the main focus of a book or a movie or a TV show, but they don't have that just kind of moral quality that we usually associate with our main character. So they'll be somebody who's important, but who just doesn't have one of those traits like courage or grace or intelligence or strong morals. A couple of examples. I know some of us read Catcher in the Rye, even if we didn't like it. That was a good example of an anti-hero, our main character, Holden Caulfield. He is somebody who's the main character of the book, but he doesn't really have that kind of quality of wanting to be like him. Or Pirates of the Caribbean, right? We have Jack Sparrow, who's our main character, but at the same time is not really kind of a person who anybody wants to emulate. Moving on to part 2. Conflict. This one will be a little bit shorter. Basically, we have 2 types. There's a lot more discussion here about different types of conflict, but for the sake of time, we're going to boil it down to 2 main types. The first one is external conflict. So that is a conflict existing between 2 people, or between a person and nature, or between a person and society. So thinking of it external, meaning it's happening outside of the person, so that person or that character is in conflict with someone else or something else. For example, Oedipus is in conflict, sorry for the typo there, he is in conflict with his fate from the prophecy. So in this case, that would be an example of an external conflict where he is conflicted because of this prophecy. On the other hand, we have internal conflict, which is something that happens inside. So this would be a conflict where you have different forces in a person's mind. So something where it's kind of an inner battle or an inward issue. So for example, from the same play, we can see that Tiresias, right, he had that inner conflict about whether or not to tell Oedipus the truth. He had those opposing forces where on the one hand, he was being told what to do, he was being given an order, and that is part of his job, is sharing these proclamations, but on the other hand, he had that conflicting force, knowing that it would cause some issues. So that would be an example of an internal conflict. And that's it for characterization and conflict. Make sure to fill in any gaps in your notes and start thinking about how this can apply to other things that you've read so that we are all ready to discuss as a class.